I spent 19 years planning my daughter's wedding in my head before I ever saw the venue. And when the day finally came, when she stood at the top of the staircase at the Peabody Hotel in Memphis, in a dress I helped her pick out, my ex-husband's new wife leaned over to the officiant and said, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear, "Isn't it sweet how the nanny still comes to these things?" I was not the nanny. I was the woman who raised that girl from the day she was born until the day she walked down those stairs. But by the end of that night, everyone in that room would understand exactly who I was and exactly what her father had spent 2 decades trying to hide. My name is Margaret. Everyone calls me Meg. I was 26 when I married Thomas Whitfield, a man 12 years older than me who owned 3 car dealerships across Tennessee, and told me, on our second date, that he'd never wanted children until he met me. 6 months into our marriage, I found out I was carrying our daughter, Ava. Thomas seemed thrilled. He bought a crib before I'd even finished my first trimester. He picked her name off a list he'd apparently been keeping since he was in his 20s. I thought that was romantic. I didn't think to ask why a man who claimed he never wanted kids already had baby names picked out. Ava was born in March. She had my mother's chin and Thomas's stubbornness. And from the very first night in that hospital room, she was the center of my entire world. I nursed her. I rocked her through colic. I drove her to dance recitals and orthodontist appointments and every single school function for 18 years. Thomas worked constantly, or so he told me. Business trips to Nashville, conferences in Atlanta, late nights closing deals at the dealership. I ran our household almost entirely alone, and I never once complained, because I believed we were building something together. When Ava turned 9, Thomas and I divorced. He said the marriage had run its course, that we'd grown apart, that it happened to plenty of couples. I was hurt, but I didn't fight it, because he was generous in the settlement and because he swore up and down that nothing would change for Ava. He kept his word about that, at least on paper. He paid for her private school. He showed up to her graduation, and 3 years after our divorce, he married a woman named Corinne, a former marketing director 15 years younger than him, and I told myself I was fine with it. I told myself that for a decade. Then, 2 months before Ava's wedding, I was cleaning out a storage unit I'd kept since the divorce. Boxes I hadn't touched in years, when I found a manila folder wedged behind a stack of old tax returns. Inside was a hospital bracelet, a tiny pink one, the kind they put on newborns, with a name on it that was not Ava's. The name was Delilah. Born 4 months before Ava, at a hospital 2 hours outside of Memphis. My hands went cold. I kept digging. Underneath the bracelet were photographs, a woman I didn't recognize holding an infant, and Thomas standing beside her in a hospital room, smiling the exact same smile he'd worn in the delivery room the day Ava was born. I found bank statements, too. Wire transfers going out every single month for 18 years to an account under the name Renata Cole. I did not confront Thomas that day. I needed to understand what I was looking at first. So I hired a private investigator, a quiet, careful man named Frank, who specialized in exactly this kind of thing, and 3 weeks later he handed me a report that rearranged everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Thomas had been involved with a woman named Renata for over 2 years before our divorce, going back to when I was pregnant with Ava. Renata had given birth to his daughter Delilah 4 months before Ava was born. Thomas never left Renata. He simply never let the two halves of his life touch. He paid Renata to stay quiet, to raise Delilah without ever showing up publicly, to disappear from any version of his life he wanted me and later Corinne to see. Delilah, Frank told me, had grown up 2 hours away, believing her father was too busy with work to visit more than a few times a year. She had no idea she had a half-sister. She had no idea Ava existed at all. I sat with that folder in my lap for a long time, not because I was angry about the affair, that wound had scarred over years ago, but because I understood finally that Thomas hadn't just betrayed me. He had built an entire hidden daughter and erased her from his life, the same way he'd tried to erase the truth from mine. I thought about reaching out to Delilah myself. I thought about confronting Thomas immediately. But Ava's wedding was 2 months away, and I refused to let her father's 20-year-old secret take one single thing away from her day. So I waited. I filed the folder away, told no one, and focused on helping my daughter pick out centerpieces. I did not know that Thomas, without any push from me at all, was about to unravel his own secret in front of 300 guests. The wedding itself was stunning. Ava had chosen the Peabody Hotel because she loved the old brick and the marble staircase where the hotel's ducks famously walked every morning. She walked down that staircase in a dress with a cathedral train, and I cried the way only a mother cries, the ugly, uncontrollable kind. The ceremony was beautiful. The dinner was beautiful. And then, during the toasts, Corinne, Thomas's wife, stood up with a champagne glass in her hand and decided to make a joke at my expense in front of the entire room. "We're so glad Meg could make it," she said, smiling out at the tables. "It's sweet how the nanny still comes to these things, even after all these years." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through a few tables who didn't know any better. I felt my face go hot. But before I could even open my mouth, Ava stood up from the head table, still in her wedding dress, and looked directly at Corinne. "She's not the nanny," Ava said, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. "She's the only parent in this room who never once had to be reminded to show up." The room went quiet. Corinne's smile faltered. Thomas reached for his wife's arm as if to pull her back down, but it was too late because Ava wasn't finished. "And since we're bringing up family tonight," Ava continued, turning to her father, "I got a phone call 4 months ago from a woman named Delilah. She found me on social media. She's 26, Dad. She was born 4 months before I was. She's been paying to see a therapist for 2 years because she spent her whole childhood wondering why her father only showed up a few weekends a year, and it turns out it's because he had an entire other family he liked better." Thomas went white. Corinne's champagne glass trembled in her hand. "Ava, that is not," Thomas started. "It's exactly that," Ava said. "I've seen the wire transfers. I've seen the photos. Delilah sent me everything because she wanted to know if I knew the truth, and I didn't. Not until 2 months ago." She turned to me then, her eyes soft, the sharpness gone from her voice entirely. "Mom found the same folder. She could have ruined my wedding with it the second she found it. She didn't say a word. She spent the last 2 months helping me pick out flowers instead. She walked around the head table, took my hand, and pulled me up out of my chair in front of everyone. 'This is my mother,' she said. Not because of a certificate, and not because of a DNA test, because she was there every single day for 26 years, and my father was busy being there for someone else." The silence that followed was heavier than anything Corinne's joke could have created. Guests shifted in their seats, unsure where to look. Thomas sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out, a man finally understanding that 2 decades of careful hiding had collapsed in the space of 90 seconds. I hugged my daughter right there on the dance floor, careful not to crush her train, and told her how unbelievably proud I was of the woman she'd become. Thomas tried to reach for my arm as I walked past him. "Meg, let me explain." I looked at him, calm, no tears left for a man who had used up his allotment of them years ago. "There's nothing left to explain," I said. "You didn't just lie to me. You built a daughter you were ashamed of and hid her from the daughter you were proud of. And you thought a joke at my expense was the way to spend her wedding night." Ava reached out to Delilah 2 weeks later. They met for coffee in Nashville, awkward and quiet at first, and then not awkward at all. They talk every week now. Delilah came to Thanksgiving this year, and she called me Meg the whole afternoon. Until dessert, when she quietly asked if it would be strange if she called me something else. It wasn't strange at all. Thomas lost more than a marriage the night of that wedding. He lost the version of himself he'd spent 20 years constructing, the one where he could keep every lie in its own separate room and never let the doors open into each other. Looking back now, I understand something I wish I'd known decades ago. Secrets don't stay buried because we're careful. They stay buried until the people we love decide they're done carrying them for us. Thomas thought silence was the same thing as safety. He thought a hidden daughter could stay hidden forever if he just kept paying for her silence. But a real family was never about the version of the story he wanted people to believe. It was about who actually showed up, morning after morning, recital after recital, without ever once needing a reason. I didn't raise Ava because a piece of paper told me to. I raised her because I loved her. Completely. From the very first night in that hospital room. And in the end, that love said more than every lie her father ever told,